Welcome to week 7. This week we're going to talk about two topics, innovation and institutions. First I'm going to introduce these different topics to you, then you're going to see how they actually fit together. So for this slide presentation, I'm going to review what complex problems are in the broader definition of what complexity is. I'm going to look at the ingenuity gap, then we're going to look at innovation and what it takes to nurture and diffuse innovations to solving environmental problems. And I'm going to give you some examples of innovative solutions, and then we'll talk about institutions and finally how institutions and innovation work together. At the end I'm going to make some comments about how institutions such as democracy are at odds sometimes with our desire to have a clean environment. So first, a review of why environmental problems are so complex and complicated. They have multiple interacting components of all the processes happen in the environment, all the processes happen in society, all the processes happen in the economy. There's many connections between these components, and many of them are tied to humans, and humans are making decisions and moving quickly through their economy and sociology, so this causes lots of disruptions and uncertainty, as we saw before. All of these problems are interrelated. There's no single solutions. Everything is connected. And if there is synergy and we do things well, then great, things get better quickly. But if there's a synergy, like a positive feedback, and things are going poorly, then it gets worse even faster. And sometimes it's hard to tell which path we're on here. The other thing is the environment is an open system for inputs and outputs, and it's public. All discussions of any environmental solution have to take place in the public domain. And I'm going to get back to this later when I talk about democracy, but there are invisible thresholds, and this is bad both for management, but it also makes it very difficult to try to get public agreement on environmental problems when you have these thresholds. So a real important part that we're going to deal with this week is this idea of an ingenuity gap. And this is related to uncertainty from last week. When you have more technology and you apply more effort in trying to solve problems, you create more ignorance. And that is, you're just creating new situations, novel situations. And you have to learn more about that. So when there's a situation you don't totally understand, that's the level of ignorance. And the question is, are we keeping up? Are we changing the environment and contributing to more ignorance faster than we're learning about it? And this ingenuity gap requires that we really think about the full picture before we move ahead. Just trying to solve something may cause more uncertainty than if we just thought about some other more holistic solutions. Okay, now innovation, it can be a single brilliant idea, but more likely it's social cooperation, bringing together multiple ideas from multiple disciplines. It can be a physical object. You might think of an innovative tool or something, but it's also processes and institutions and combination of all of these, physical tools, processes, institutions, information technology. And it used to be you needed training in order to learn about a new innovation, but now innovative tools come with embedded instructions. So for example, before when you wanted to learn how to, in the past, when you wanted to learn how to use a combine, you had to go to the city in the Midwest that had a combine. You had to learn how to drive that. You had to learn how to operate everything. Then you might think, oh, I'll buy a combine. Now if you're buying some software, it comes with embedded instructions. And if you're buying something else, you can just go look up the instructions on the web. So there's a whole new level of being able to get innovations out to people without having specific training for that. Okay, so this relates to, to how do you spread important innovations. If you have a solution that's really valuable to a lot of other people, you need those advances to be adopted by those people. So it's in the nature of an innovation to spread. It's in the nature of a good innovation to be able to be easily picked up and used by a wide range of people. But often this is dependent on a network of people, and that's crucial. And as some of the studies have shown, so is trust and proximity within that network. You're more likely to share some important feature, some important innovation with somebody who's nearby and you trust for some other reason. Maybe you trust them because they're part of your church or your professional group, or maybe they're in your neighborhood and you happen to know them. All these are very important linkages that are hard to predict just for any old innovation. Now, in Haberstrand's work on the diffusion of innovation, he talked about agricultural innovations, and even then, there were clusters of how people learned to use their pastures better. It wasn't just people from all around the country learning, but they learned from each other. And again, maybe this is the old agricultural way compared to how we do things now, but we need to be aware that the literature shows that people learn from each other in close proximity. Another thing was the agricultural use of the telephone. They could call the agricultural station, and this research was done in Sweden, and they could call the agricultural research station and get expert advice, but they used the telephone to just call across to their neighbor. So they used something that could go a long distance, and they used it, again, trust and proximity. So what's interesting, and for this course, because we're in a technological platform, are the new social networks and way we have to communicate, are those helping us diffuse important environmental innovations? And by important environmental innovations, I mean there's a lot of stuff that travels over the net through BuzzFeed and Facebook and all of those. But is this also helping us get some of those environmental innovations? I think that's a very interesting question that we can address as individuals and as we see our use of technology. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples now of innovation, and this is really going to be sort of the focus of this presentation. Just to give you some examples, and then you can look at the slide set and go over these. But here's the problem, that there's air pollution during rush hour, and in fact, it's worse for pedestrians than it is for people in cars. So the people who aren't driving get the penalty for the pollution. So in Portland, what they've done is they studied a section of Powell Boulevard where they can synchronize the lights, and if they do that, they study whether they get smoother traffic flow and whether that relates to lower pollution. So one of the things they're really worried about are these particles that are 2.5 nanometers and smaller, because those are the ones that, if you take a deep breath, they go way down in your lungs and they can do some real damage. So what they found is during rush hour, if they keep the lights on longer, the green lights on longer, traffic flows more smoothly, and there's less exposure of pollutants to pedestrians. Just the cars are going, same number of cars, but they're just going through more efficiently. But some of the worst impacts on pedestrians are heavy diesel trucks and the buses that sit at the bus stops and idle. So with changes in orientation of the bus shelters, they can reduce exposure. So this is very interesting, an innovative study that used a set of stoplights that could be synchronized. Another one is New York City needs more clean drinking water. And instead of building more water treatment plants for the city, they purchased and controlled land upstate. They already had some control over it. And they removed dairies and other polluters because a lot of dairies weren't being operated very efficiently, and there was a lot of cow manure residue that was going into the streams and then the rivers. So they could have more water with minimal treatment. And they have, if you look at this map over here, you see that this water comes a long way into New York City, but it comes in from from watersheds that have very minor impact, and it comes in very clean. So it saves them. It's a source of water, but it also saved the city of New York a lot of money in water treatment. Another example of water cleanliness and innovative approaches is that some people are trying to put floating islands into small lakes to clean up the water. Well, this is a great idea because the plants take up the nutrients from the lake, and all the root systems that are hanging down below the island clean up a lot of the heavy metals and other pollutions. But the problem is that there's regulations and licensing fees are very high for these. And in addition, some environments require ongoing monitoring that may be too technical for most small organizations might want to use this. So the innovation is to try to form a co-op that bundles the regulation and monitoring support. So the co-op provides these, through information technology, provides a bundle of information to help meet the regulations and also the monitoring. So again, it's bringing these different groups together that could really make the use of floating islands that treat up small lakes and ponds much more effective. Now here's an example of bringing different technologies together, because remember I said innovations are often bringing ideas from different disciplines or different areas together, and this is combining a bicycle path and a bioswale. Now a bioswale is often just a ditch with some grass in it, and here we're looking at it from the top view. What we have is a bicycle path, and we have the green parts of little bioswales, and in between is a bike parking lot. So the idea here is this combining this was innovative, and also it allowed for the bike path to be made out of semi-permeable paving, so that even contributed more to handling rain runoff of the street. So we had the bioswale and the semi-permeable path working together to help reduce stormwater runoff. Now, a final example is really a pretty long story about how Costa Rica decided that they needed to protect its natural resources and become sustainable. And what they saw was there was a huge push for more grazing, and that was destroying their forests, more grazing by cattle, and it was destroying their forests. So they decided to really shift to another natural resource base, and that was tourism and natural capital. And they really wanted to increase the amount of natural area they had. So one of the ways they did this is they set up a bunch of national parks, and they provided independent governance for each of these parks. And that independent governance then allowed the parks to be run in a very local manner that met the local needs. And another innovative thing that they did was to have around each park there's a zone of limited commerce, and inside some of the parks there's an area, a very, very protected area of restricted reserves where only biologists can go in there. So they have this range from a zone of limited commerce where you could have small hotels and restaurants right around the park for the tourists. Then you have the park itself, and then inside the park a real restricted area. And this allowed them to really preserve local businesses and in these small towns, local inns and restaurants for quite a while during the period of Costa Rican development. Now, if you're familiar with Costa Rica now, they've developed some very large resorts along the west coast and in the Guanacaste area, but that came after they'd already done these other sorts of ecotourism all around the country. So I'm only going to say a few things about institutions, which because the videos and the reading really fill this in pretty well. There's some good videos by Eleanor Ostrom describing how she uses these institutions and what they are. But simply what they are is durable agreements that set rules for groups of people to interact. And it can be at the federal or state or local level, or even businesses, how businesses interact with the environment. That's a type of institution. And many institutions that we're going to see, that you'll hear described, are actually self-organizing by the locals in order to meet local complexity of the problems. And so only the locals knew enough about it to really capture all the details and richness, and so they were the ones that set up these institutions. Now, innovation needs institutions as well. And I'm going to just discuss this, how innovations in particular sectors might need institutions in order to help them implement those innovations. So in education, one of the things we see is we need these educational institutions to comply. We need institutions that help combine all the disciplines in searching for environmental solutions. Within education, you see departments and that sort of structure, but often it takes another level of institution, either at the university level or research labs, to really combine all these disciplines. Innovation needs governance. We need institutions to advise people on how to proceed under uncertainty. Should they employ some new innovative thing, or should they copy something that they know had already worked? This requires input from a governance structure. For just finding environmental innovations, we need institutions that learn quickly, not locked into any set ideological or financial systems, and can be nimble and can find new ways to solve problems. And underlying this is financial. I'm not saying like financial in terms of Wall Street, but just financial institutions that support environmental innovations and that support seeking new ideas, support attempting solutions, and support an environmental atmosphere where people can learn from their mistakes, move on. That is really sort of supporting a scientific adaptive management framework. And then all of these sectors together, we need institutions that bring all of these sectors together so we can look for transdisciplinary solutions that include education, governance, environmental groups, and businesses, all toward the same goal of solving environmental problems. Okay, now just a quick little comment about environment and democracy. There's many areas of synergy, and in fact, Norton believes that you can't really find a sustainable solution to any environmental problem unless it comes about through the process of democracy. But there's conflicts that we need to acknowledge, and some of those are that when you have very complex problems, like we talked, wicked problems, they just don't have a simple cause and effect relationships. You can't get the public to understand those issues well enough to be able to vote in a simple yes or no type situation. Sometimes they have hidden thresholds. That is, these environmental problems have hidden thresholds. We don't really know where that is. Again, it's very hard to get people to vote in a democratic institution about something that's invisible to them. And the other thing, as we discussed before, much of the public dislikes uncertainty, and they would do almost anything to avoid ambiguity or uncertainty. So they're not going to be willing partners in some broad democratic experiment. Okay, two other major threats to environmentally sustainable democracy is that technical problems like we're facing really favor a technocracy, and a technocracy is when only the experts run. It's not in addition to democracy, it's sort of a substitute for democracy. And finally, when you have resource scarcity, the goodwill and the trust that is so important for democracy can just wilt away. And we haven't really seen that in the United States, maybe seen that in some other situations where when the resources are just really depleted, the democracy breaks down. And that's an environmental and a governance problem. So just in conclusion, the ingenuity gap is really important. We have to consider the whole picture. Useful innovations are often combinations of ideas from many sources, and so the nurturing of innovation is much more a social construct than it is a purely lab research sort of approach. And finally, the institutions that we need to help us solve with these natural resource problems have to be as complex as the local natural resource problem itself. And that means often they're created and sustained by the local community. Thank you.